I've just had to re-record parts of this video because this is a bamboo and it looks like by the way, if you can hear dogs barking in the background, there's 6 of them. We love them. Before arriving in this new space, I spent almost a year back home in only what I can refer to as pure analysis paralysis. I was constantly driven by fear and an urge to want to escape the life that I was currently living. But instead of creating any change, I found myself stuck in a loop. I'd wake up, feel anxious about who I wasn't, what I didn't have, and immediately I'd reach for my comfort, which was my coffee, start researching obsessively, and then somehow always end up back in the same place I was trying to escape. So it was a cycle. It was the same thoughts, same reactions, same exhaustion, all wrapped up in my little comfort distraction that was ultimately leaving me unfulfilled. The only constant in my life was me trying to fix myself as if I was a problem to solve. Needless to say, I wasn't exactly in a position to work towards my goals. Then again, what even were my goals? I had no idea. I had no idea whether these goals of business or where I was wanting to move to were even mine, or whether they were just Instagram-fed ideals I mistook for my purpose. Quick juice break. It was during those frantic mornings. My habit was go to Waitrose to get my free coffee, and then go to the library and research until my free parking runs out. And as dysfunctional as that comfort loop was, eventually led me to the first book that completely changed my perspective. Felt like a bridge between what felt spiritual and intuitive and scientific at the same time, if you will. It was somewhere between neuroscience, consciousness, and quantum theory. I've mentioned about this theory in my previous video, chaos theory. It views the brain as a dynamic living system. If you've heard of chaos theory before, it's normally taken from the weather systems form. This came about in the 1960s from a meteorologist called Edward Lorenz. Discovered that tiny changes, say a butterfly flapping its wing, could lead to huge, unpredictable outcomes. That idea is what we know today as the butterfly effect. And it's in systems like this, small shifts, small initial conditions can create massive ripple effects over time. The brain is a non-linear, complex system. Here's what I mean when it comes to emotion. Let's say that someone experienced shame very early on in childhood. Maybe they were criticized, overlooked, or made to feel inadequate despite their effort. The early emotional wound becomes an initial condition in their system. And as they grow, this starts to evolve into a pattern of self-blame that become emotional attractors, and it starts forming what's called a fractal. Patterns repeating at different scales of self-criticism, self-blame. And it may appear random at first, but it's not random. There is a hidden structure behind the chaos. It's just not so obvious when you're inside the loop. And then on a physical level, can activate the sympathetic nervous system, the stress response. Hormones like cortisol and adrenaline getting a release, keeping the emotional system locked in a feedback loop. Stress, shame, guilt, and effort, it's systems theory. Inputs and internal conditions can create emergent behaviour, even when that behaviour seems irrational from the outside. And yet, even within this emotionally reactive loop, there still exists a point of intervention, a narrow window of choice. The neuroscientist Jeffrey Schwartz draws on principles from quantum mechanics. He refers to this as the quantum effort of attention. When we consciously direct our awareness, we choose to focus on one thought over the other. We're not just shifting mindset, we're actually influencing the probability that one thought will dominate over the other. Thoughts are kept alive through neurotransmitters. These are released when tiny calcium ions pass through ion channels so small that quantum physics applies. At this microscopic level, nothing is guaranteed. Calcium might pass through, but then it might not. This means that any given moment that a thought exists as superposition. So thought A could continue, or thought B could come in and take over. Which one wins is the one that you give your attention to. In quantum terms, the mind, through attention, can bias what thought dominates over the other, which outcome becomes real. You're aware, in true quantum style, the observer freely chooses the question that is asked, and nature responds by giving one of those possible answers into being, shouldn't we also ask, who were we when we chose that question? Who were we in that moment that we decided to choose one for over the other? My lowest moments, when I was desperate to feel something other than feeling stuck, that's where I found a flood of content. Stop being the victim. Discipline is everything. Now, some of that language may help the right person in the right mindset, but I wasn't in the right mindset. Clicked on it, I rewatched it, I followed it, fed the algorithm, let it shape what I paid attention to. I wasn't interrupting the pattern, I was feeding it, telling myself to push harder and be stronger, override the shame. Every time I forced myself to act without addressing the underlying pattern, I burnt out. Resistance causes persistence. It's got a ring to it. The more I tried to suppress my fear or deal with my shame through hollow action, the more effort it took to maintain that illusion. I don't think my body was in the right state to manage those thoughts effectively, because the body, specifically the nervous system, if it's dysregulated, trapped in survival loops and distorted signals, what may feel like choice might actually be compulsion in disguise. Intentional change theory talks about two emotional attractors: the positive emotional attractor and the negative emotional attractor. Positive emotional attractor is linked to the parasympathetic nervous system. This is your rest and digest state. The negative emotional attractor tied to your sympathetic nervous system, related to your fight or flight state. Before you can create meaningful change, the body needs to be safe enough to imagine a future. To do that, first you need to exit survival mode. Compassion, humility, and forgiveness. Even these ways of approaching your thoughts, it helps shift your nervous system towards this positive emotional attractor. And it's from here that something in the brain starts to happen. It opens into the default mode network. Is the place in your brain that is associated to daydreaming, introspection, and self-connection, where your ideal self lives. My real self was stuck in a negative emotional attractor, operating from fear, urgency, and pressure. This is what's called prevention focus, where the brain narrows, scanning for threats. This is useful for survival tactics, but it's not so useful when you're trying to reimagine your life. It was in that state that I was operating mostly from the other part of the brain called the task positive network. Helps us take action, yes, but not envision change. To create sustained, meaningful change, your ideal vision must be rooted in your ideal self, not your ought self. Version of you shaped by obligation, comparison, and or fear. It's not about avoiding challenge completely and avoiding action completely, but it's about where you're coming from. It doesn't mean that you need to sit in stillness, meditating on a mountaintop for months on end. This is combined, so it can be minutes of breathing and dreaming. For me, it definitely started with breathing, but if you have these negative thoughts, you have to meet them with the compassion, humility, and forgiveness first, and move into the daydreaming, move into the thinking about what you truly want. It activates your default mode network and you gain clarity before then proceeding into action. This is what's called mental contrasting, holding the vision and the obstacle at once. This was my life post-graduation, hustling with no clarity, reflecting with no motion. I never created any real change, and I did the same thing for a year. And you're not going to notice it right away, but it is happening. You'll start to shift out of this survival mode, and that's where you enter that so-called creator mode that I've seen a lot of discussion on. This is where you begin to shape that reality from within, where manifestation, you could say, stops becoming mystical, actually starts becoming neurologically real, in theory. So configuring your reality, you can say that the observer may shape reality, but only when the system, nervous system, the body and the mind is regulated enough to support that choice. I'm not exactly sure what my tipping point was. Again, it was just maybe a change that was in the background. It's about doing one thing at a time, and most importantly, working with your immediate environment, dealing with each immediate concern. It was about thinking what tools I had in my immediate environment to move towards my newfound intention and purpose that came from those little moments of stillness, those little moments of grounding, those little moments of regulating my nervous system and showing myself compassion. This is where chaos theory comes full circle. It's where the small inputs, when placed at the right point in the system, can create a dramatic output over time. It's like in Taoist thinking, begin to flow between these two states, stillness and action. The flow between the default mode network and the task positive network when we need the action. It's about the process. Move within this rhythm. And I believe that's what the practice really is. I don't believe that I'm such a mega manifester yet, but I'm starting to understand a little bit better these concepts and how they work together. And it's interesting to me and it keeps me going. So if you're also stuck in a loop, think about a time you were truly happy and what could give you that feeling again. If you've been in stillness and you're waiting for that perfect moment to act, then ask instead, what's one small thing I could attend to? What tool could I use that's within my immediate environment right now to work towards that happiness?